Hello music makers, welcome back. Did Calvin Harris steal Chicane's riff?
Oh my god, you guys, drama bomb!
As a self-professed muso, a musician my entire life, near perfect relative pitch, and professional for 18 of those years, the last decade or so, in dance music specifically, I'd like to think I can give a pretty solid case of the facts. Let's have a look, shall we? So, Nick Bracegirdle, better known as Chicane, has put out a video claiming that Calvin Harris, with his new song Blessings, has stolen the riff from Chicane's Offshore. Now, in that video, he makes a fairly convincing argument that the two are very similar by lining them up and playing them at the same time. But it's not quite as simple as that. Let's have a look. First of all, he starts the video by saying, "Here's the original Offshore," and then plays this.
This is the original Offshore. Right, we'll remember that.
Except that's not the original Offshore. That is Offshore heavily pitched and tone manipulated away from the original. This is the original Offshore. Whereas this is what he played back. It's harder to detect because you're hearing the audio recorded through his phone. So he's moved it from the original F minor down to C minor. That's a difference of 5 semitones. Why has he done that? Well, for those not au fait with music, we only have 12 keys to choose from. They go round in a circle like this. So the maximum distance one key could be away from another is 6. This is 5, except that's not the whole story either. For you see, he has actually manipulated Calvin Harris's track in pitch as well, upwards by 1. The original key of Blessings is B minor. Here's the original. And here's what it sounds like when he pitched it. So that means the difference between the original Offshore and the original Blessings is 6. That is the furthest away possibly you could get in terms of key. F minor versus B minor, completely opposite ends of the spectrum. If you play back the two together in their actual original form, it sounds like this. So very different to what he played back. Okay, so he's moved both tracks into C minor so he can compare them. Now, this isn't such a smoking gun. Matching the keys of two songs is fairly common, especially for DJs. This is how they make bootlegs and mashups. And as I say, there are only 12 keys to choose from. So manipulating two tracks who end up in the same key is not such a stretch. Although matching tracks from complete opposite ends of the spectrum is actually quite rare. However, Nick does neglect to inform anyone that he has done this. Whether he's done this on purpose is not for me to say, but having to manipulate things this far does certainly weaken his argument, in my opinion. Speaking of having to manipulate things, first we had key. What about rhythm? If you would argue that music is only made up of pitch, rhythm, and lyrics, having no lyrics to be concerned with in this instance, that leaves us with rhythm. Do the rhythms match up? Well, if we do put them in the same key like Nick did, as to not be confused by pitch differences, here's what that sounds like playing back together. So clearly not the same rhythm, but what Nick argues in his video is if you take one section of Offshore's riff, the rhythm will match up. What he also fails to mention, by the way, is you have to take a certain section of Calvin's riff in order for the chords to match up too, which is the last half. But we'll get to chords in a minute. So if we take this half bar of Offshore, move it across by 1/16, then if we take this section of this half bar of Blessings, whilst pitched to the same key, we get to what he showed in his video. That sounds like this. So yes, those two rhythms do match up. But unfortunately, that doesn't really indicate much. Because just like it's quite simple to match two keys together, it's almost as simple to match two rhythms, especially very short rhythms. You see, many years ago, I made this video, and in that I argued, are there only two rhythms? because 99% of dance music is written in what's called 4/4. That is the time signature. It just means 4 lots of 4 beats. That's how it's counted. In fact, in classical music terms, 4/4 is known as common time because it's very, very common, not just in dance music, most other genres of Western music too. Now, the way we divide that time up is into a grid of 16. This is especially prevalent in modern electronic music ever since technology started helping us make music, be it the first drum machines from the 70s and 80s, or the computer software that aids us to this day, including what I'm using right now. The most common way to write a rhythm is on this grid of 16. In my video, I argued that had led to 2 very common spacings in rhythm, known as an eighth and a dotted eighth, showing you the distance here on a grid of 16. By combining these 2 different spacings in different combinations, you can make nearly all of the dance music rhythms of history. Now, what Nick has done has halved this into a grid of 8s because he's used a half bar section. So that leaves us just 8 possible places on the grid to either have a note there or not have a note. So to work out the total possible amount of permutations that could be is simply 8 times 2. Yes, that's right. There are just 16 possible total rhythms we could have in this short amount of time. In genres like jazz, where there are more micro timings, this number would indeed be a little higher, but not for a majority of modern electronic dance music. Of the 200,000 brand new tracks uploaded every day to Spotify, what do you think the chances of finding this rhythm would be if we snipped out just half a bar from those songs? In fact, we don't have to theorize. We can just reverse Nick's logic onto his own track. Here's 1989's Little Louis with French Kiss. That's a half bar rhythm. Now, if I take a certain section of Nick's track, just like he took a certain section of his own track, pitch it until it's in the same key, just like he did, and play them at the same time, we get shock horror. It's the same rhythm. What about 1992's Gat Decor Passion? Oh my word. How about CC Peniston Finally? Okay, that one's a bit of a stretch. How about Faithless by Insomnia? You get my point, right? I mean, these are just the first tracks that came to my head that I could remember were popular before 1997. Give me enough time, I will find you literally hundreds of examples with the exact rhythm. So, after chopping and pitching his track to make it match Calvin's, claiming these 2 heavily selected snippets of rhythms are legally too close beyond coincidence, that's a bit like a poet suing you because you also used the first 8 letters of the alphabet. Extremely weak argument, in my opinion. Okay, so no concrete evidence on key or rhythm. Despite that, you have to admit they do have a similar vibe. Why is that? Part of it comes down to a common technique used to manipulate chords in these types of riffs. Again, Past Me comes to the rescue because I've already made 2 videos on this. The first video was this one. It wasn't very good because it's one of my early attempts. I called it the 1 chord trick. Because in a nutshell, you can make these riffs by using tricks to manipulate chord 1. And then I did a much better job of explaining the concept in the recent Insomnia video. Yes, there's a reason I included Insomnia in that last section. It's because it uses this same writing method. It's quite simple. We simply take a standard minor chord, like this one here, repeat it a few times using those 2 rhythms I showed earlier in any combination you like, Now, the way these riffs are created is to create a melody within the chord, and we do that by shifting one of the notes, the middle one. In a minor scale, this middle note only has 2 places it can go, apart from where it already is. It can go up to this note or down to this note. In music, these are called suspended chords, but we don't need to go into that. All we need to know is if we play around with this up and down, we can create melodies without actually changing the chord. That's the riff to Insomnia. Now, if we just swap between these 2 variations, and simplify the rhythm a little bit to a 1-bar pattern, we can get this. That is the basics of offshore. There's a little more to it. There's a principle in music called harmonization, which again is too big of a rabbit hole to go down right now. But in simple terms, one of the ways to create harmony is to have other notes either side of your melody move in the same direction. So when that middle note moves, we can either move this lower note at the same time. That sounds like this. That's the one offshore uses. The insomnia riff also does this sometimes. Again, go and see my video, but you'll see occasionally that lower note moves with the melody, and sometimes it doesn't. Now, to fully turn this into the offshore riff, we need to do two things. Put it in the correct key, that original F minor. We're in A at the moment. And the only other difference with offshore is what's called the inversion of the chord. This top C note here is inverted to the C note underneath. And that is the exact notation for offshore. Now, back to harmonization. We saw how offshore used the lower note under the melody to harmonize it, but another harmonization option you can explore is moving the upper note. You can move that with the melody instead of the lower one. That sounds like this. That's the type of harmony that Blessings uses. It's technically the same principle, moving a chord between its natural minor state and its suspended state. However, if we look at the full notation for Blessings, you can see the riff overall is much, much longer. That's because it has a lower note which changes over time, changing the chord progression, something which offshore doesn't do. Now, straight off the bat, I can tell you this is impossible to change by manipulating a sample. You have to play the music yourself from scratch. You cannot manipulate another recording to change its harmonization technique or its chords. That means, not even taking into account that these two sounds are different, these are not the same guitars. In fact, one of them isn't even real. Regardless of that fact, on the musical differences alone, Blessings cannot be a sample of offshore, so there is no recording copyright infringement. However, there are two copyrights to music, not just the recording. Again, see my video on copyright if you want further details. The other copyright is songwriting or publishing. So by using this technique, does Calvin's track infringe upon Chicane's offshore in a publishing sense? I personally don't think so. Again, this is a very, very common technique in dance music. To name just a few tracks that preceded offshore, which use this exact technique, we have Felix, Don't You Want Me, 1992, Prodigy, No Good, 1993, Insomnia, Faithless, 1995. Again, those are just off the top of my head. So to sum up, there is nothing unique about the key, the scale, the rhythm, or the writing technique used to make that riff in offshore. Obviously, if Blessings was a note-for-note or rhythm-for-rhythm or both copy of offshore, or indeed a direct sample, then Nick would have a complaint here. But that's not the case. In my opinion, the only argument you can make is because the two tracks happen to make dance riffs with a guitar sound using a similar technique, although not identical, they have a similar vibe. And unfortunately for Nick, he cannot and should not own this vibe. Because if that were the case, then we would have people being able to copyright genres, which I'm sure you'll agree would not be a good thing. Now, having said all of that, if you're watching, Nick, and you'd like an expert musicologist to represent you in court, I am available. I am very good at this, which means my fee would be quite steep, I'm afraid. It would be, let me just calculate this. Let's call it £270,000. Unfortunately, I couldn't do a no-win, no-fee on this one. But for that amount of money, I would give it my all, I promise you. And I would probably have to delete this video. Let me know. Oh, and Calvin, if you're watching, your fee would be much less. Keep that on the down low though, yeah? Shh. So that's my opinion on the matter. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Have I missed anything? Do you know more than I do? Future me here, I've just noticed Calvin has put out a response, and it's quite funny. Go and see that. Anyway, if you learned something, you know what to do. Press some buttons, or you can help me out by buying me a coffee, link in the description. And until next week, I will see you in the comments. Bye-bye.